Alright, hey guys, this is Dr. Keen. We're talking about the skin today. We just finished up the chapter on tissues and talked about all the different types of tissues and where we find those. And one of the things we talked about was stratified squamous, which is your skin. And there's lots of parts to that though. Connective tissue also comes into play here, and adipose tissue, and all kinds of things, and even areolar connective tissue. So lots of things that we learned in the last chapter are incorporated into this chapter. So let's look at what we're working with here. So the skin, also referred to as the integument, is cutaneous membrane. It's part of what's called the integumentary system. The integumentary system includes the skin, but it also includes all the things that are incorporated in the skin, like your sweat glands, oil glands, hairs, nails. All those things are part of the integumentary system. So what the skin is a protective layer. It's extremely essential for overall body function and for your body to stay healthy and to protect itself from the outside environment. Without our skin, we wouldn't last barely any time at all. It also keeps water and other things out. It's very pliable and flexible. It has what's called collagen in it and elastic fibers in it. And without your skin, we would quickly fall prey to bacteria, especially, and other pathogens. And we would have too much heat loss. Water without our skin, water penetrating our body directly could actually damage our body, even though water is so important to our function. It protects the entire body from mechanical damage like bumps, bruises, cuts, things like that. Chemical damage, things that are trying to get inside of our body. Thermal damage, which is like heat exposure. Ultraviolet radiation. Our skin has what's called melanocytes in it, and that creates melanin, which become more abundant when we're out in the sun. So that creates like a darker skin color, which prevents sun from getting into our internal system and protects us from our environment. Also protects us from bacteria, which is extremely important also. I mean, we have bacteria all over us, but there is some bacteria that can be detrimental to us. And insulates and cushions our organs. It also acts as a mini excretory system. Excretory system means that it releases things. So urea, salts, water, and sweat and things like that that come out. Also oil comes out of our skin. Those are all natural things that are released from our body. Manufactures several proteins that happen because of synthesized vitamin D, and the way we synthesize vitamin D is by being exposed to the sun. And then along with cholesterol in our liver, it develops a process that creates vitamin D in our body, helps with bone health and overall health. And then sensory receptors in our skin help us feel things and prevent us from damaging ourselves because it helps us feel pain and things like that. So it helps us navigate our external environment. So main layers of skin: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis, which is also sometimes called subcutaneous tissue. And this is what it looks like. This up here on the top is epidermis. In the middle is called dermis, and then in the bottom there is the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer. So epidermis, outermost layer, made of stratified squamous epithelium, and it has keratinized tissue on the top. Keratinized means it's hardened and it's basically mostly protein, and the cells that are up on the top of your skin are actually dead cells. Inner layer of the skin, dermis, made of dense connective tissue, and the hypodermis is made of adipose tissue, or fat, which is a loose connective tissue, and that helps insulate your body and works as a shock absorption. Just underneath that, you got another loose connective tissue of areolar connective tissue, which connects to muscular tissue underneath that. So again, going back to all the stuff we learned last chapter, epidermis and dermis are firmly connected. I mean, there's not really any separation there, really, but you can have friction on your skin, which can cause those two layers to kind of rub against each other. And what happens is the epidermis starts to swell up, and fluid from the dermis starts to come up into those swellings, and that creates blisters. So that's kind of how that happens. Just a little side note there. So the epidermis, outer layer of the skin, doesn't contain blood vessels, so it's avascular. Doesn't have any blood vessels. It's this red part up on top here. It's mostly cells of that are keratinocytes, which is keratin cells. Like I said, it's a protein in the epidermis. It's also found in your nails and your hair. That's what makes it hard. Like your nails are hard because they're mostly keratin. Your hair's got a little bit of a toughness to it because of the keratin that's in it. It's also in your skin, mostly on the outermost cells. It gives it its toughness. Oh, sorry. So with the epidermis, though, I know most of you, if you've learned about the skin before, you've learned that the epidermis is the outermost layer. But you probably have not learned about the fact that epidermis itself has 5 layers to it. So there's 5 different parts to the epidermis. All of this right here is epidermis. This is the top layer, which is the keratinized cells and the dead cells. Then this part up here is keratinized also, and they're also thin squamous cells. But then in the middle here, you got more like cuboidal type cells, and at the bottom, you even have like columnar type cells. And these are the 5 layers: stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal. You will need to know all 5 of these and the order that they're in. So stratum corneum is the outside. Corneum, just like in your eye, your cornea is the outer layer of your eye that protects your eye. This is the outer layer of your skin, protects your skin. It's got like shingle-like cells, and they're dead cells. I told you guys before about this. The outside surface of your skin is actually all dead cells. There's no living cells there anymore. Those are all underneath. This is an overcoat that keeps a protection on your body. Stratum corneum is not able to get adequate nutrients and oxygen because all the nutrients and oxygen come down from the dermis, and it's far away from that dermis. It's gotten quite a bit away from that dermis, so that's why these cells are now dead, and nearly everything we see on the outside is dead. So this layer rubs and flakes off, and that's what creates dust in your body, or in your house and around the area. So you will have new cells though within a day, 1 to 2 days. Stratum lucidum. Sorry, not 1 to 2 days. I meant 25 to 45 days. Stratum lucidum is a layer that's formed by the cells that were produced in the stratum basal, which is down at the bottom, and they're pushed up, and now they're flatter, increasingly more keratin in them, and they are dead also. These are clear cells, and they're also not able to get nutrients and oxygen because they're far away from the dermis. Stratum granulosum is the next layer below that, and those cells are also produced in the stratum basal and are pushed up into the layer. And then stratum spinosum is this big thick layer here. Those are produced in the stratum basal also, and then they're pushed up. So all the cells in the skin are produced in the stratum basal down in the bottom, and they're pushed up towards the outer layer. Stratum basal, deepest layer, that's where new cells are created in the skin, and that's where they all start, and then they go up from there. Melanin. So I mentioned this earlier. Melanin is what creates pigment in your skin. Some people have more melanin than others, and people who have more melanin are the ones that have darker skin. And that's really all that makes skin darker, and that's because of melanocytes. Melanocytes are cells within the tissue of the epidermis. And you can see here the melanocytes, those big purple ones, and then the black dots, that's melanin that was produced by the melanocytes. And those melanocytes are what secrete the melanin, and when you are out in the sun a lot, then you you create more melanin, and that's what makes your skin darker. Freckles and moles, those are kind of like small spots where melanin has accumulated. So how does melanin protect you? Well, stratum basal cells phagocytize, or they eat the pigment, and it accumulates within them, and then it forms this protective umbrella over top of the lower layers of your skin, and that's what prevents you from getting any penetration of UV lights. Despite melanin, though, there is some effects of excessive sun exposure, and you hear about this in the news, and people talk about making sure you're wearing sunscreen and all that stuff so you're not getting too much sun exposure, because you can get too much and it can cause leathery skin, can cause your immune system to depress, can even alter your DNA, and when that happens, sometimes that can cause mutating cells and possibly skin cancer. Dermis is the part below the epidermis, the inner layer of the skin, and this is when people refer to like a hide of an animal. That's the dermis that they're talking about. It's a really tough, strong part of the skin, and it's connective tissue basically. So it's holding that skin together, and it's really strong and stretchy. So the dermis varies in thickness. It's thick on the palms of the hands and thin in the eyelids. So some areas are thicker than others. But there's actually two layers to the dermis too. There's a papillary layer and there's a reticular layer. And we're going to see this here in a second. So the papillary layer is right up against the epidermis. So you see these kind of wavy parts right here of the dermis. That's the papillary layer. And then from the lower part of the epidermis down, that's the reticular layer. Papilla, the papillary layer, is what makes ridges and your fingerprints and things in your fingers. It's right underneath that dermis, and those indentations of the papilla is what causes those things to form on your fingers. Also, in the papillary layer, you have these things called Meissner's corpuscles. Meissner's corpuscles are these things right here. They sense touch, so they have to be up towards close to the epidermis, so you can touch things and you can feel that sensation. And those are basically nerve endings in the skin that allow you to sense that touch and feel different senses. On the hands and feet, the papilla are arranged in definite patterns, and that's what causes our fingerprints. And you do have prints on your feet and toes also, but fingerprints have sweat pores and leave unique identifying films, sweat, called fingerprints. So that's what we use for identifying people in certain situations. The other part of the dermis is called the reticular layer. It's the deepest skin layer, and that has blood vessels, sweat and oil glands, deep pressure receptors, which are called Pacinian corpuscles. So Meissner's corpuscles is when you touch something real light and you feel that sensation. If you push down deep on something and you feel more pressure, that's a Pacinian corpuscle that's feeling that. And you also have phagocytes that are in the reticular layer of the skin, which what phagocytes do is they are part of your immune system, and they consume bacteria, and they prevent them from going deeper into your body. So collagen and elastic fibers are also in your dermis. Collagen is what gives your skin toughness, and it attracts water and hydration, and elastic fibers give it some elasticity and some stretchiness and allow it to be resilient in different situations. And it has a very strong nerve supply also, which gives us the ability to touch things and feel that sensation, and then also feel pain and feel irritation or even like tickling and things like that. All those nerve endings are in your dermis, in the reticular layer of your dermis, and you can feel that sensation because of those. So that is the introduction to the skin and the different layers. So the main things you need to remember is that there's 5 layers to the epidermis, and there's 2 layers to the dermis, and what those are called and in which order they go.